Silas Wegg, being on his road to the Roman Empire, approaches it by way of Clerkenwell. The time is early in the evening, the weather moist and raw. Mr. Wegg finds leisure to make a little circuit, by reason that he folds his screen early, now that he combines another source of income with it, and also that he feels it due to himself to be anxiously expected at the Bower. "Boffin will get all the eagerer for waiting a bit," says Silas, screwing up, as he stumps along, first his right eye, and then his left. Which is something superfluous in him, for nature has already screwed both pretty tight. "If I get on with him as I expect to get on," Silas pursues, stumping and meditating, "it wouldn't become me to leave it here. It wouldn't be respectable." Animated by this reflection, he stumps faster, and looks a long way before him, as a man with an ambitious project in abeyance often will do. Aware of a working jeweler population taking sanctuary about the church in Clerkenwell, Mr. Wegg is conscious of an interest in, and a respect for, the neighborhood. But his sensations in this regard halt as to their strict morality, as he halts in his gait, for they suggest the delights of a coat of invisibility in which to walk off safely with the precious stones and watch cases, but stop short of any compunction for the people who would lose the same. Not, however, towards the shops where cunning artificers work in pearls and diamonds and gold and silver, making their hands so rich that the enriched water in which they wash them is bought for the refiners. Not towards these does Mr. Wegg stump, but towards the poorer shops of small retail traders in commodities to eat and drink and keep folks warm, and of Italian frame makers, and of barbers, and of brokers, and of dealers in dogs and singing birds. From these, in a narrow and a dirty street devoted to such callings, Mr. Wegg selects one dark shop window with a tallow candle dimly burning in it, surrounded by a muddle of objects vaguely resembling pieces of leather and dry stick, but among which nothing is resolvable into anything distinct, save the candle itself and its old tin candlestick, and two preserved frogs fighting a small sword duel. Stumping with fresh vigor, he goes in at the dark greasy entry, pushes a little greasy dark reluctant side door, and follows the door into the little dark greasy shop. It is so dark that nothing can be made out in it, over a little counter, but another tallow candle and another old tin candlestick, close to the face of a man stooping low in a chair. Mr. Wegg nods to the face, "Good evening." The face looking up is a sallow face with weak eyes, surmounted by a tangle of reddish dusty hair. The owner of the face has no cravat on, and has opened his tumbled shirt collar to work with the more ease. For the same reason he has no coat on, only a loose waistcoat over his yellow linen. His eyes are like the over-tried eyes of an engraver, but he is not that. His expression and stoop are like those of a shoemaker, but he is not that. "Good evening, Mr. Venus. Don't you remember?" With slowly dawning remembrance, Mr. Venus rises, and holds his candle over the little counter, and holds it down towards the legs, natural and artificial, of Mr. Wegg. "To be sure," he says, then. "How do you do?" "Wegg, you know," that gentleman explains. "Yes, yes," says the other. "Hospital amputation?" "Just so," says Mr. Wegg. "Yes, yes," quoth Venus. "How do you do? Sit down by the fire, and warm your other one." The little counter being so short a counter that it leaves the fireplace, which would have been behind it if it had been longer, accessible, Mr. Wegg sits down on a box in front of the fire, and inhales a warm and comfortable smell which is not the smell of the shop. For that, Mr. Wegg inwardly decides, as he takes a corrective sniff or two, is musty, leathery, feathery, celery, gluey, gummy, and, with another sniff, as it might be, strong of old pairs of bellows. "My tea is drawing, and my muffin is on the hob, Mr. Wegg, will you partake?" It being one of Mr. Wegg's guiding rules in life always to partake, he says he will. But the little shop is so excessively dark, is stuck so full of black shelves and brackets and nooks and corners, that he sees Mr. Venus's cup and saucer only because it is close under the candle, and does not see from what mysterious recess Mr. Venus produces another for himself until it is under his nose. Concurrently, Wegg perceives a pretty little dead bird lying on the counter, with its head drooping on one side against the rim of Mr. Venus's saucer, and a long stiff wire piercing its breast. As if it were Cock Robin, the hero of the ballad, and Mr. Venus were the sparrow with his bow and arrow, and Mr. Wegg were the fly with his little eye. Mr. Venus dives, and produces another muffin, yet untoasted. Taking the arrow out of the breast of Cock Robin, he proceeds to toast it on the end of that cruel instrument. When it is brown, he dives again and produces butter, with which he completes his work. Mr. Wegg, as an artful man who is sure of his supper by and by, presses muffin on his host to soothe him into a compliant state of mind, or, as one might say, to grease his works. As the muffins disappear, little by little, the black shelves and nooks and corners begin to appear, and Mr. Wegg gradually acquires an imperfect notion that over against him on the chimney-piece is a Hindu baby in a bottle, curved up with his big head tucked under him, as he would instantly throw a somersault if the bottle were large enough. When he deems Mr. Venus's wheels sufficiently lubricated, Mr. Wegg approaches his object by asking, as he lightly taps his hands together, to express an undesigning frame of mind. "And how have I been going on, this long time, Mr. Venus?" "Very bad," says Mr. Venus, uncompromisingly. "What? Am I still at home?" asks Wegg, with an air of surprise. "Always at home." This would seem to be secretly agreeable to Wegg, but he veils his feelings, and observes, "Strange. To what do you attribute it?" "I don't know," replies Venus, who is a haggard melancholy man, speaking in a weak voice of querulous complaint. "To what to attribute it, Mr. Wegg? I can't work you into a miscellaneous one, nohow. Do what I will, you can't be got to fit. Anybody with a passable knowledge would pick you out at a look, and say, no go. Don't match." "Well, but hang it, Mr. Venus," Wegg expostulates with some little irritation, "that can't be personal and peculiar in me. It must often happen with miscellaneous ones." "With ribs, I grant you, always. But not else. When I prepare a miscellaneous one, I know beforehand that I can't keep to nature, and be miscellaneous with ribs, because every man has his own ribs, and no other man's will go with them, but elseways I can be miscellaneous. I have just sent home a beauty, a perfect beauty, to a school of art. 1 leg Belgian, 1 leg English, and the pickings of 8 other people in it. Talk of not being qualified to be miscellaneous. By rights you ought to be, Mr. Wegg." Silas looks as hard at his one leg as he can in the dim light, and after a pause sulkily opines that it must be the fault of the other people. "Or how do you mean to say it comes about?" he demands impatiently. "I don't know how it comes about. Stand up a minute. Hold the light." Mr. Venus takes from a corner by his chair the bones of a leg and foot, beautifully pure, and put together with exquisite neatness. These he compares with Mr. Wegg's leg, that gentleman looking on, as if he were being measured for a riding boot. "No, I don't know how it is, but so it is. You have got a twist in that bone, to the best of my belief. I never saw the likes of you." Mr. Wegg, having looked distrustfully at his own limb, and suspiciously at the pattern with which it has been compared, makes the point. "I'll bet a pound that ain't an English one." "An easy wager, when we run so much into foreign." "No, it belongs to that French gentleman." As he nods towards a point of darkness behind Mr. Wegg, the latter, with a slight start, looks round for that French gentleman, whom he at length descries to be represented, in a very workmanlike manner, by his ribs only, standing on a shelf in another corner, like a piece of armor or a pair of stays. "Oh," says Mr. Wegg, with a sort of sense of being introduced, "I dare say you were all right enough in your own country, but I hope no objections will be taken to my saying that the Frenchman was never yet born as I should wish to match. At this moment the greasy door is violently pushed inward, and a boy follows it, who says, after having let it slam,